Have you heard of flu or pox parties? This is basically where a bunch of kids are placed together with the goal of exposing them to infectious diseases, things like chickenpox, measles, even COVID. Yeah, that's not recommended. Vaccination is much safer and more effective, but this video isn't about that. It is about filth parties, but parties about a disease that wasn't even infectious. It's a pretty rare disease, maybe one you haven't even heard of, because it's not really around that much anymore, at least not in North America. The disease I'm talking about is pellagra. So pellagra was first noticed in 18th century Spain and Italy. Doctors started to notice that patients had dry, flaky red skin, hence pellagra, a disease of the skin. This dry red skin was mostly on areas that were prone to sun exposure. Your cheeks, you'd have this butterfly type rash on the backs of your hands, on your feet, but you also had other symptoms, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and you also developed psychiatric symptoms, confused, tired, depressed. It got so bad that you could even experience psychosis, and many patients ended up being admitted to asylums with so-called pellagrous insanity. This constellation of symptoms is what medical students today might memorize as the 4 Ds: dermatitis, dementia, diarrhea, and death. So what actually caused this illness? It was a mystery for quite a long time. The leading theory was that it had an infectious cause. Remember that germ theory was taking hold by the beginning of the 20th century. So the idea that some kind of microbe, bacteria, was responsible for this illness and that it was transmissible, communicable, was not unreasonable. People also started to think that there was a microbe or fungus associated with corn because a lot of people that were suffering had corn as a staple in their diet. So I talked about how it was initially noticed in Europe, but people started to notice it in the early 20th century. 1902 was the time that the first case was reported in the United States, and this was in the American South. Doctors were still going on with this infectious theory and were trying to associate it to people's diets. Doctors also started to notice that pellagra mostly spread and was most common among poorer areas, so they tried to make these arguments about poor sanitation and hygiene in the area and how this spread the disease. But it wasn't until an infectious disease specialist, Dr. Joseph Goldberger, came onto the scene that people started to figure out what was going on. He noticed that in institutions like asylums, the patients would be sick, specifically the poorer patients, but the nurses, the staff, the doctors wouldn't be. And that's kind of strange, isn't it? I mean, if there's an infectious illness, it's affecting everybody. We started to wonder what was going on, but you'll have to come back for part 2 to learn more.